And if we're nervous or upset about anything, he's the perfect person to be there with you.
So, looking at Nick's father's rigging set here, the leather's actually in a pretty poor state.
They've warmed our hearts for years on the repair shop, quietly becoming household names without ever seeking the spotlight. Together, Suzie and Steve Fletcher have become synonymous with care, patience, and the magical ability to restore what many thought was beyond repair. But what viewers didn't see, what was never shown on camera, was the silent history. These two siblings carried with them into that quaint workshop. Beneath their easy smiles and tender hands lay a lifetime of pain, survival, and quiet strength. Their bond, while clearly loving, was rooted in something deeper. A pact formed in childhood under circumstances no child should endure. When Suzie and Steve finally chose to speak about their past, it wasn't for publicity or drama, it was out of necessity. A lifetime of buried trauma can only remain hidden for so long. And when the truth finally surfaced, it shocked fans who had only known them as the calm, collected duo who fixed broken heirlooms. This wasn't just a story about a beloved TV show. This was a story of resilience, of two lives shaped by early darkness, by choices made in silence, and by the quiet power of healing through craft. Suzie and Steve Fletcher grew up in what appeared to be a perfectly lovely home in rural Oxfordshire. To anyone on the outside, their family seemed warm and close, a house filled with handmade clothing, the smell of freshly baked cakes, and the ticking of fine old clocks. But on the inside, things were far more complicated. Their mother struggled with severe postnatal depression at a time when such conditions were rarely acknowledged, let alone properly treated. The illness was invisible, but devastating. She often withdrew for long periods, unable to cope with daily life while there. Father, a gentle man, trying desperately to hold the family together, eventually suffered a nervous breakdown of his own. Steve later recalled how as children they were shuffled between relatives, unsure of when they'd next return home. No one explained why things felt so unstable. There were no long talks about mental health or emotional reassurance. Instead, the family coped with silence. Silence became their way of surviving. Steve and Suzie, though still so young, learned to read each other's moods, to anticipate trouble, and to protect one another with a wordless understanding. And it was this shared childhood pain that forged a connection between them that would outlast distance, time, and even tragedy. For years, they never talked about it publicly, but the experience lived in every careful movement of their hands and every restoration they performed on screen. From a very young age, Suzie was drawn to working with her hands. Her mother had been a skilled seamstress before illness took its toll, and her father was a respected watchmaker. Craftsmanship was in her blood. By 14, Suzie had apprenticed under a local saddle maker named Ken Langford, learning to cut and stitch leather with precision and care. Leatherwork became not just a job, but a language and escape from the chaos of her childhood home. It was something she could control, something she could make beautiful, even when everything else around her felt broken. Horses, too, were a solace for her. Their calm presence, their strength, their trust, all of it, soothed the anxiety that had built up over years of uncertainty. As a young woman, Suzie made a bold decision. She left the UK and moved to Boulder, Colorado. What started as an adventure quickly became an act of survival. In the US, she built a thriving business, her name becoming quietly known in the equestrian and leatherworking communities. But behind the success was a dark truth she rarely spoke about. A man named Rob, someone who at first seemed loving and supportive. But over time, Rob's true nature emerged, controlling, violent, and cruel. The abuse was often hidden behind closed doors, and Suzie, like so many victims, felt isolated and ashamed. Back then, she later said, people didn't talk about abuse. Families didn't intervene. You suffered in silence. And so she poured herself into her work stitch by stitch, piece by piece, trying to hold herself together through the beauty she created, while Suzie was building a new life across the Atlantic. Steve remained in Oxfordshire. He became a master horologist, inheriting his father's meticulous approach to restoring timepieces. Steve married, raised 5 children, and quietly kept the family's legacy of craftsmanship alive. But his calm demeanor belied the emotional weight he carried. While he never left the town they grew up in, he also never fully left the trauma behind. He watched from afar as Suzie endured her own struggles in America, feeling both protective and powerless. When she returned to the UK, after her husband's death from cancer in 2013, Steve saw an opportunity not just to reconnect, but to help her rebuild. He gently encouraged her to consider joining the repair shop, where he'd become a familiar face. At first, she resisted. Public life didn't interest her. She had spent years hiding her pain from the world, and the idea of cameras capturing her every movement was terrifying. But eventually, she agreed, and something remarkable happened. The workshop, with its quiet camaraderie and reverence for the past, became a place of healing. There was something therapeutic about restoring broken things, about honoring their history while giving them new life. It wasn't just about the objects, it was about what they represented: survival, memory, love. For Suzie, every saddle she mended, every old bag she brought back to life, was a small victory over the chaos of her past. For Steve, working beside his sister, brought comfort and pride, a reminder of how far they had both come. It wasn't until years later, during a deeply personal podcast interview, that the siblings finally spoke publicly about the darkness they had endured. "You can't keep carrying everything inside forever," he said. "It eats at you." Suzie's revelations were even more devastating. She described moments in her marriage when she feared for her life, one in particular where Rob had lifted her by the throat during a violent outburst. Her feet, she said, weren't touching the ground. She remembered gasping for air, wondering how it had come to this. "I always thought that kind of violence wasn't something that would happen to me until it did." Her honesty shocked fans, many of whom had only ever seen the calm, composed artisan on television. But for Suzie, speaking out wasn't about shocking anyone. It was about reclaiming her story. Rob's death had left her with complex emotions: grief, relief, guilt, and ultimately a desire to move forward. The repair shop offered a rare chance. To do that, working with her brother, surrounded by people who respected her craft, gave her not just purpose, but peace. And through that work, she began to stitch herself back together, not in secret, but in full view of those who had unknowingly supported her all along. Today, when you watch Suzie and Steve on the repair shop, it's impossible not to see the depth behind their eyes. Every antique they restore holds a story, but so do they. Suzie's memoir, The Sun Over the Mountains, delves into the many layers of her journey. From childhood trauma to her life in the United States, from surviving an abusive marriage to finding purpose again through craft, her words have inspired thousands to speak up about their own pain, to seek healing through creativity, and to believe that it's never too late to start over. Steve, ever steady and soft-spoken, continues to be a grounding force on the Shoah. Man who, through his quiet persistence, helped give his sister a second chance. Their bond, forged in pain, has become one of their greatest strengths, and it shows. Fans now understand that the beauty of the repair shop isn't just in the items it restores, it's in the people who do the restoring. In Suzie and Steve Fletcher, we see what resilience truly looks like. Not loud, not flashy, just quiet courage, hard-earned wisdom, and a belief that broken things and broken people can be made whole again. So the next time you watch an episode and see Suzie delicately stitching leather, or Steve fine-tuning the gears of a vintage clock, remember, you're not just witnessing craftsmanship, you're witnessing the triumph of the human spirit.